Amen.
Amen.
The last time I presented was
Naposledy,
at
čo
the
som
Oceanic
prezentovala,
Camp
bolo na oceánskom
2
camp
weeks ago
meetingu.
now.
To je pred 2 týždňami.
I'm not sure if
Nie som si
people are
istá,
aware of the day.
či ľudia vedia, aký je
What
deň.
date is it today?
Dnes je
It's October 3.
3.
And what does that mean?
novembra. Čo to znamená?
October 3
3. októbra
was the day that
2018
time was presented in Arkansas.
sa
it's the
prezentoval
2-year
čas v Arkansase.
Anniversary of the Midnight Cry
Je
message
to,
in the United
sú
States.
to 2
And I just
roky,
wanted to mention
dvojročné
it's
výročie polnočného volania v
something
Spojených štátoch.
profound or some
Chcela som len
great methodology, but we did find it fascinating at the
zdá sa
time.
nám to
It was
úžasné.
presented October 3 in
Vtedy to bolo
Arkansas.
3.
10 days
októbra.
later, where was it presented?
O 10 dní neskôr to bolo kde?
I'm going to be looking at the chat a lot today, so please feel free to
Odpovedajte mi
comment.
do chatu, budem sa pozerať.
October 3 in
3.
Arkansas,
októbra v Arkansase,
October 10 in France.
10.
Someone messaged me
októbra
privately.
vo Francúzsku.
Correct. October 3, Arkansas, October 13, France.
Teda 13.
And
pardon.
we
Takže
understood
3.
at
v
the
Amerike
time
a
that the Midnight
13.
Cry
vo
message
Francúzsku.
had a footwear and a footwear.
Vtedy sme tomu tak rozumeli, že to polnočné volanie má svoju
October
nohu.
3,
3.
it had a
októbra
foot
položilo
on the
svoju
earth,
nohu
and
na
October
zem
13, it
a
had a
13.
foot
októbra
on the
položilo
sea,
svoju
land
nohu
and sea.
na more.
Ellen White speaks
Ellen
about
Whiteová
the message having
hovorí
one foot on the sea
o
and
tom
one foot on
posolstve,
the land.
o tom
So it
anielovi,
went
ktorý
from the
položil
United
jednu nohu
States,
na more a
which
jednu
is
na
the
zem.
land, to
Spojené štáty sú zemou
France, which
a
is the sea.
Francúzsko je
And where
je
was
v
the
mori,
third place
na mori.
that the Midnight Cry message
A kde je to
was
tretie
shared?
miesto, kde bolo zdieľané polnočné
United
volanie?
States, October 3, France, October 13, December 2018. Where was the message shared?
Kde ešte bolo zdieľané to
The third
posolstvo?
location.
To tretie miesto.
Some of you should know this well. Brother Graham, Island of the Seas.
Bola to
Island of the Seas
Oceánia.
ministry, which is what location?
A to je?
Following the chat. Fiji.
To je Fidži.
Someone answered privately. So it went from the land
Išlo to
to the
zo
sea
zeme k
to the
moru.
islands of the sea
do
was the
oceánie.
3 steps that the Midnight Cry
To boli 3
message took
kroky,
in
ktorými prešlo polnočné
2018.
volanie v
October 3, 2 years ago,
2018.
was the United States.
A
10
takto
days
pred
later,
2
France.
rokmi to bolo v Spojených
A number
štátoch.
of weeks later, Fiji, which is, as we saw 2 weeks ago, is led by the Islands of the Sea ministry. And we saw at the time
V tom
that
čase
that
sme
was a
videli,
prophetic fulfillment.
že to malo prorocké
It was
naplnenie.
another stamp on the Midnight Cry message.
To bola taká
So
pečať na
I just
polnočné
wanted
volanie.
to note that, considering the interaction we had 2 weeks ago
Pred 2
with
týždňami
the Islands of the Sea
sme
ministry,
boli
and considering the time
so
frame that we're in.
služobnosťou v oceáni.
So 2 years ago,
Takže pred
that
2
message
rokmi
was given.
bolo dané to
In
posolstvo.
some ways, it feels like 20 years ago. In some
Niekedy sa
in
to
some
zdá,
ways
že to
it feels
bolo
like
pred
2 weeks.
20 rokmi a niekedy sa mi to zdá len 2 týždne.
From the first 3 main givings of that message
Od tých prvých 3 ako keby
October,
hlavných
November and
podaniach toho
December
posolstva, to
through
bolo v októbri,
2019,
novembri a
it
decembri.
went worldwide.
Od 2019.
And voice
to
after
išlo
voice
celosvetovo.
joined that cry, and it really swelled.
A mnohí sa k tomu volaniu
As
pridali.
country after
Išlo
country
to krajina po
and
krajine.
individual after individual joined their
Jednotlivec
voice
po
to that
jednotlivcovi
message.
sa pridávali.
Since then, we have traced that
Odvtedy
history
sme
with the end of
stopovali tie
ancient Israel,
dejiny
seeing the
od
triumphal
konca
entry,
starovekého
through the
Izraela.
upper
Videli
room,
sme
through the
slávnostný
separation,
vstup,
through the pain of Gethsemane, and through the cross, which we still
potom
prophetically
kríž,
still don't
Getsemanskú
understand
záhradu.
completely.
Prorocký
Through
kríž
November
ešte
9.
plne
And we
nerozumieme, to je
entered into
9.
a new
november.
dispensation.
Vošli sme už do nového obdobia.
We're in the dispensation
Sme
of Jacob's time of
v
trouble.
dobe
Does
Jakobovho
anyone
súženia.
feel like we're not in Jacob's time
Je
of
tu niekto,
trouble?
kto sa necíti ako v Jakobovom súžení?
I think that is one subject we're all in concord
Myslím, že
with.
toto je téma, na
It is a
ktorej sa
time of
všetci
trouble.
zhodneme, že máme súženie.
So that message that was
To
given 2 years
posolstvo,
ago
ktoré bolo dané pred 2 rokmi,
swelled and was taught throughout the world in
išlo a bolo
2019.
učené
It really came to a
v
conclusion
2019
at the
a
German
prišlo k svojmu
International Camp
záveru
Meeting
na
in
nemeckom
August and
camp
September
meetingu
of last year.
minulého roku.
The final touches were put on that message.
Také
World War
posledné dotyky sa spravili
The Third
tomu
Diadochi
posolstvu
War, World War I, completing
s
our understanding
s
of
treťou
World War III,
diadochskou
and
a prvou svetovou vojnou.
the message of Eden to Eden.
A posolstvo od Edenu k Edenu.
That soon became
Čoskoro
also the focal point of the shaking.
sa to
The
stalo
division
predmetom
that had been growing
triebenia.
over some time came into the open. And God saw fit to direct
Bohu
us,
sa
now
páčilo,
that the
aby
midnight
nás
cry message had reached a completion.
viedol k tomu,
God's
že
directed
polnočné
us back
volanie
to
došlo k
reform
dokonaniu.
lines. The lines of the beginning and end of ancient Israel and the beginning and end of modern Israel. And right when we came into the most
Keď sme prišli
critical parts
k tým
of the history
najkritickejším
of the
častiam
priests,
dejín
these
kňazov,
two back-to-back testing time periods,
tieto
God saw fit to anchor us
skúšobné
in those
časy,
original reform lines.
Boh nás
And
ukotvil
if
v tých
you are
pôvodných
familiar
reformných
with the
líniách.
Canadian Zoom camp meeting of a while ago, a couple of months ago perhaps,
Pamätám
that
si v
is what
Kanade
we
na Zoom
tried to
stretnutí,
remind people of.
tam sme to
We hold
ľuďom
on to those cords, and
pripomínali,
God gave
aby
us
sa držali
those
tých
cords
lán.
at the exact same point as the first of 2 shakings came into the open. Those are the
Hovorili
cords
sme o
that
tom
were particularly
prvom
to
z tých
anchor
viacerých
us.
triebení,
The Midnight Cry
že
message
tie laná
and
sú
those
tie, ktoré
reform
nás
lines
ukotvia.
given in 1989.
Tie nám boli dané už v
So from
89. tie línie.
August and September of
Takže
last year, when the
minulého
Midnight
roku,
Cry message
august,
came to some type
september,
of
polnočné
completion,
volanie prišlo k dokonaniu.
through till about April and May of
Trvalo
this
to
year,
až do apríla,
about
mája
6,
tohto
7
roku,
months, we
6-7
focused on the
mesiacov.
end of ancient
Tam sme sa
Israel.
zameriavali na
And it is
koniec
the pattern that
starovekého
we see behind
Izraela.
us. The model that takes us
Ten
from
model,
4
ktorý
BC
nás
to
berie
100
od
AD.
roku 4
And
pred
then the
Kristom
3
až po
groups of
100.
people called in that time period.
A tie 3
Two for
skupiny,
the
ktoré boli v tom
Jewish
čase
nation,
povolané.
And then finally at
Najprv
34
učeníci,
AD,
potom
which is
židovský
here,
národ a potom
to
nakoniec
the
v roku
Gentiles.
34 pohania.
So through the history of that, particularly that first shaking,
Takže v dejinách, zvlášť toho prvého
and also
triebenia,
into the second, from August, September through around April, May, we focused on the end of ancient
v
Israel,
auguste a v
and
septembri
we
ešte od maja sme
largely
sa
established
zaoberali
that
tým
reform
starovekým
line.
Izraelom.
I'm not saying there isn't still
Nehovorím,
additions to be
že sa
made,
tam už nedá
but
nič
that
pridať,
reform line became very well
ale
established.
dobre sme túto reformnú
And
líniu
if we
ukotvili.
believe that in that reform line, it is a cord that would take us over both shaking time
A
periods.
to je to, čo nás previedlo cez
From
triebenie.
about April, May, the
Od
end
apríla,
of the
mája
school in Portugal,
v Portugalsku
through to
až
now.
doteraz,
So that's
teda po
about 6
Portugalsku až
months
doteraz,
again.
to už je asi
We
6
have been
mesiacov.
focusing on the beginning of modern Israel,
Zameriavali sme sa na
Millerite
začiatok
history.
moderného Izraela.
And you'll notice that we haven't actually gotten that
A
far.
vlastne sme sa
It's
nedostali
only a
príliš
few weeks
ďaleko.
since we actually even laid out a structure.
Je to len pár týždňov, čo sme
And I
dali
would
tú
suggest
štruktúru.
one of the reasons for
A chcela
that,
by som povedať,
one of the
aký je jeden z
characteristics
dôvodov
of
toho.
this time that makes it so difficult
Jedna z tých
to
vlastností
be
toho
able to
času,
lay out this history
prečo je to také ťažké, tieto
a result of
dejiny
the pandemic. We are starting to have some camp meetings over
dostatočne
Zoom, but what
predložiť,
we
je
haven't
kvôli
been able to
pandémii.
do is have
Cez Zoom
schools.
robíme niektoré
And it's
štúdia,
at
ale čo
schools
nemôžeme
that
robiť
the
sú
message
školy.
really
A sú to práve tie
becomes-
školy,
If you picture it like bread dough, it gets stretched, it gets folded, it
kde-
gets wrestled with and
kde sa s
kneaded.
tým posolstvom naozaj vieme
Not just by the
popasovať,
person up the front,
ukotviť
by the
ho.
students who
Nielen
are
ten človek, ktorý
participating.
učí, ale aj všetci
it
študenti.
becomes an open discussion,
Stáva sa otvorenou diskusiou.
not just with the students there, but by people following online who then
A tiež
message
tí, ktorí
and
sú
ask questions
online,
and add
nielen
their
študenti,
thoughts.
ale aj tí, čo sú online,
One of the
pýtajú sa
reasons Acts
otázky.
27 is such a solid study
Jedna z
is because
dôvodov,
it had
prečo
3
skutky
months
27 sú taká
at the
pevná
school in
štúdia, je,
Brazil early started
že
last
v
year where we
Brazílii v
wrestled with
škole
Acts 27.
sme s tým zápasili 3 mesiace.
We haven't been able to do that with
A
Millerite
s
history.
dejinami
And it's the
Milleritov sa to
absence of
nedalo
having
robiť.
schools in this movement that has impeded
To, že nemáme teraz prorocké školy,
the rapid growth of this message and the ability of many people to feel established in
je
that
dôvodom toho, že
reform
mnoho
line.
ľudí sa cíti takých
But we
neukotvených
have
v tých
been going
reformných
over
líniách.
it Sabbath after Sabbath.
Ale robíme to aspoň sobota po
So-
sobote.
We are missing schools.
Takže tie školy nám chýbajú.
So I wanted just to give us a brief
Chcela som
verbal
vám dať
overview
také
of the
zhrnutie
last 2 years.
za posledné
From
2 roky.
October 3,
Od 3. oktobra,
3 main camp meetings,
kde 3 hlavné camp meetingy,
3 main presentations in
3 hlavné
Arkansas,
prezentácie v
land, France,
Arkansase,
sea, Fiji, islands of the sea.
Francúzsku.
Then it spread through 2019, came to a
oceány.
conclusion
Potom to
in
prišlo k
the
záveru
German
na
International
nemeckom
Camp
camp
meeting
meetingu.
by September last year.
To bol september
Then
minulého
God gave
roku.
us back the reform lines. They are particularly the cords that were going to
Oni
hold
sú
us
tie
through
lana, ktoré nás
the
držia,
epicenter of 2 crises facing this movement.
ktoré nás udržia vlastne
We
cez 2
faced the
krízy
first
alebo cez epicentra
that
tých kríz.
split in the upper room when Judas left.
Tam je
Then through
vlastne,
Gethsemane and the cross, November 9.
udržali nás v
Still
tom
properly to
rozdelení,
be
keď Judáš
understood.
odišiel.
Then entering into the wilderness time period, the 40 days. On
Potom je tu
2 different
40 dní po kríži.
models of the end of ancient Israel.
Tam sú dva
The 40
rôzne
days
modely
of
v
the
starovekom
wilderness
Izraeli.
and the 40 days of the
40 dní
disciples.
učeníkov
And
a
you can
40
take
dní na
that and see
púšti.
that
A
in
vidíme,
other 40-day time periods. 40 days of Goliath
tu aj 40
claiming to have
dní
defeated this movement.
Goliáša, ktorý sa snaží
I won't go
potopiť
into
toto
that any
hnutie,
further.
ale to teraz nejdeme
But that
rozoberať.
40 days has now reached a conclusion
Ale
and we
tých 40
are
dní
now
prišlo k
in
záveru
the upper room time
a už
period.
sme v čase hornej miestnosti.
We've entered into a new
Vošli
dispensation
sme do nového obdobia
from November 9 last
od
year
9. novembra
and we
minulého
have
roku
been through that time period
a cez tieto
needing to
dejiny
understand
sme išli
concretely the beginning and end of ancient
a
Israel,
museli sme
more
konkrétne
commonly known
porozumieť
as the
začiatok
line of Moses
starovekého
and the line of
Izraela,
Christ,
líniu
and the
Mojžiša
beginning and end of
Krista
modern Israel,
a
more
začiatok a
commonly known as
koniec
the line of the
moderného
Millerites and the
Izraela.
line of
To
the
sú Mileriti a
144,000.
144 000.
We've been impeded in the growth of that message by the absence of schools.
Ale
I
to
wouldn't say
posolstvo
so much camp
nemohlo
meetings.
tak rásť
Camp meetings are the more
kvôli nedostatku školám.
public
Camp meetingy sú
presentation
viac také verejné
of what is
prezentácie
generally discovered and dug out through schools and private studies.
toho, čo sa vlastne pochopilo
And
a
we are
vykopalo v
missing that.
školách.
But we also recognize that this is the dispensation
Tiež rozpoznávame, že
focus of
toto je
our work
obdobie, kde
is
je
also
zameranie
particularly organization.
našej práce,
And
nášho
that
diela.
also requires more time than it ever has before.
A to vyžaduje viac času ako predtým. A to je
So
ohľadne
we have been
organizácie.
meaning over the last 5 months from May to
Takže-
study Millerite history together.
Chceli sme spolu študovať dejiny Milleritov
And
už od mája.
We've gone on what might seem quite a
A
lot of tangents.
išli sme na rôzne také odbočky.
We started that study and realized
Začali sme
that
to
we
štúdium
needed
a
to also
pochopili
lay
sme,
a couple of other things in
že
place.
museli sme ukázať aj
First of all,
niekoľko vecí.
why did
Za
Christ
prvé,
not come in Millerite
Prečo
history?
Kristus neprišiel v dejinách Milleritov?
We would say because it's a history of
Povedali by sme,
failure.
lebo sú to
Then
dejiny
we need to
zlyhania.
understand why is it
Potom
a
musíme
history of
chápať,
failure.
prečo sú to
We
dejiny
would say they
zlyhania.
went back into the Laodicean condition.
Povieme, že
We
išli sme
wanted to
naspäť do stavu
understand what that
Laodice.
meant.
Chceme vedieť, čo to znamená.
Why is this failure?
Prečo je toto
Why is
zlyhanie?
that the Laodicean
Prečo
condition?
to stav Laodice?
So we went back to here
Vrátili sme
and we
sa
saw
sem.
the Apis bull.
Videli sme tu toho býka
And we
Apis.
saw what this Apis bull was and
Čím on bol
represented.
a čo
And then we were
reprezentoval.
able to trace it and see why the end of ancient
Mohli sme
Israel
to
was
sledovať
failure because it was
a vidieť,
success.
že nie, že
But we see why
prečo by toto bolo
ancient
zlyhaním,
Israel,
to
why
bol
the Jewish
úspech,
nation fell
ale
away.
prečo
It's
židovský
a
národ
history of
odpadol.
success,
Toto sú
but
dejiny
not for the
úspechu,
Jewish
ale
nation.
nie pre židovský národ.
So we wanted to see what this Laodicean condition
Takže
was
chceli sme vedieť, čo bola tá Laodice, čo bol
and
ten
how
stav
it's carried
Laodice
through in such a way.
a ako sa to nieslo.
Not that our history is a history of failure,
Nie, že by naše dejiny
but
boli
why for
dejinami
the
zlyhania,
Adventist
ale
institution it is a history of
pre
failure.
inštitúciu
Why
adventizmu to
they
je,
fail where this movement
oni
succeeds.
zlyhajú,
And
zatiaľ
what we
čo toto hnutie
recognized was
úspeje.
that it was a
A
returning
my sme
to
videli, že
idolatry.
to bol vlastne návrat k
The Apis
modlárstvu.
bull, the idolatry of the
Tak,
pagan
ako
nations,
sa oni vrátili k
the
modlárstvu toho byka
Laodicean
Apis.
condition, the idolatry of apostate Protestantism.
A my sme sa
So,
vrátili k
All
modlárstvu
that we've
odpadlého
studied in this
protestantizmu.
history that has seemed to be taking us away from Millerite history has been
To všetko, čo sme
necessary to
študovali, čo vyzeralo,
understand
že sú
Millerite history.
odbočky, bolo to potrebné,
Now
aby
we
sme
know
rozumeli dejinám
why they're a
Milleritov.
history of failure.
Teraz
They
vieme,
went back to
prečo
apostate
boli
Protestant
dejinami
idolatry.
zlyhania.
What
Vrátili
was
sa
that idolatry?
do modlárstva
We began to look at conspiracy
odpadlého
theories,
protestantizmu.
at nationalism,
Pozerali sme sa na nacionalizmus a konšpiračné teórie.
apostate Protestant thinking as it
To
developed from
odpadlé protestantské
1798
myslenie, ako sa
particularly,
vyvíjalo v
and then through all of that
1798.
history, even addressing the conservative Protestant response to the League of Nations in 1919, the threat of globalism that
Hrozba
they held to.
globalizmu, ktorej sa držali.
And now we find that as Israel, as the Jewish
Teraz
nation,
vidíme,
held on to that
že tak ako
idolatry
sa
from
židovský
pagan
národ
nations,
držal toho
today
modlárstva,
Adventism has
dnes
held on to the
adventizmus
idolatry
sa drží
of
modlárstva
apostate
odpadlého
Protestantism.
protestantizmu.
The Jewish nation would never have
Židovský
admitted to
národ
it.
by si
Adventism
to nikto
never admits to
nepriznal
it.
a tak si to ani adventizmus
see that?
nikdy neprizná.
Ancient Israel would say,
Keď vidia staroveký
We look at the
Izrael,
wickedness
povedia, akí boli
of
bezbožní.
Rome, we're in opposition to Egypt and to Babylon and to Rome. We
Staroveký
can see
Izrael
that they
povedal,
don't
že
follow God.
my
We
sme
can see
proti
that
Rímu, my
they
sme
need to
proti
be destroyed.
Egyptu.
They're in idolatry.
Oni sú modlári,
They can't
oni
see how
musia byť
they've
zničení.
imbibed the exact
Oni
same
nevidia, ako
thinking.
oni prijali to isté
Adventism
myslenie.
today,
Dnešný
they look
adventizmus
out at the world. If I can give one
sa pozrie
example,
na svet,
they look out at the Supreme Court,
na
and what
najvyšší
does
súd,
every good conservative,
kde sú
socially conservative Adventist
a taký
think when they look at the
dobrý
Supreme Court?
sociálne konzervatívny adventista pozrie sa na
It's
najvyšší súd
horror. Why?
a povie, to je horor.
Why do conservative Adventists fear the Supreme Court?
Prečo sa boja
Why are
najvyššieho
they
súdu?
horrified by the
Prečo sú
Supreme
z toho
Court?
zhrození?
What's the issue they have with it?
Jaký majú problém s tým?
It's Catholic.
Že je katolícky.
So many members of the
Toľko
Supreme
členov
Court are
najvyššieho súdu
Catholic.
sú katolíci.
So a good socially
Takže
conservative
dobrý sociálne
Adventist
konzervatívny
feels
adventista
threatened
sa
by
cíti
the Supreme
ohrozený
Court
najvyšším
because
súdom,
the Supreme Court is Catholic.
pretože je
And they believe that
adventistický.
this
Oni
Catholic
veria,
Supreme
že tento
Court, because
katolícky
they're afraid
najvyšší
of
súd,
Catholicism, who elected those Catholic Supreme Court justices?
a kto ich vlastne tam
It wasn't a
zvolil?
Catholic president.
To nebol
It was
katolícky
not a
prezident,
Catholic Congress.
ani kongres.
Protestants
To boli
elected
protestanti,
those
ktorí ich
Catholic
zvolili,
Supreme Court justices.
týchto sudcov
But
katolíckych.
Adventists
Ale
look at
adventisti
those Supreme
sa
Court judges and
pozrú
they're
na najvyšší
afraid.
súd a
Why?
boja sa. Prečo?
Because sometime in the distant future,
Lebo niekde v budúcnosti
Catholic
títo
Supreme Court
katolíci a
justices
títo
might
sudcovia
institute a Sunday
môžu
law.
zaviesť nedeľný zákon.
So they're afraid because they see Catholic Supreme Court justices.
Takže sa
But
boja
in
týchto
real life,
sudcov
how do they feel about
najvyšších
that Supreme
súdov,
Court?
ale v skutočnom
Those
živote
Catholic Supreme Court justices are socially
títo sudcovia sú
conservative,
sociálne konzervatívni
Republican-leaning,
s republikánskym sklonom a mentalitou.
and those exact same justices are ruling on what
Títo istí
issues?
sudcovia
Abortion. How does Adventism feel
rozhodujú
about
aj
that?
o potratoch.
Now they agree with those justices.
No, o tom už
Gay
adventisti s nimi
marriage. How does
súhlasia.
Adventism feel
Keď
about
príde
that?
na homosexuálne
Now that
manželstva,
they agree with those
o tom už tiež
justices.
súhlasia.
LGBTQ rights.
Práva
Now
pre
where do they
LGBT
stand?
komunitu.
They
Kde sú
agree with those
adventisti?
same
Už
justices.
zrazu s nimi
The way
súhlasia.
those justices define religious liberty.
To, ako títo sudcovia
We
definujú náboženskú
discussed a few weeks
slobodu,
ago the 2014 Hobby Lobby
hovorili
decision
sme o tom rozhodnutí Hobby Lobby,
the Supreme Court ruled
kde Najvyšší
in
súd
favor of a company
rozhodol v prospech
that did not want to
spoločnosti,
give health
ktorá
care
nechcela poskytnúť
it,
zdravotnú starostlivosť
did not agree with to its employees.
svojim zamestnancom, s ktorými nesúhlasila.
A family business that is
To bol
owned by a
rodinný
religious
biznis,
family wanted
bola
to
to nábožná
control
rodina
what health care they could give to their
a oni chceli
employees
ovládať, akú
based
zdravotnú
on
starostlivosť
their
budú hradiť
religious
svojim
And the Supreme Court
zamestnancom na
decided
základe
in
ich
favor of that company.
náboženského presvedčenia.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a dissenting voice in that Supreme Court case, and she spoke out strongly against that Supreme Court case.
Najvyšší súd rozhodol v prospech tejto rodiny. Ruth Bader Ginsburg sa proti tomu
socially conservative justices
veľmi otvorene
ruled in
postavila.
favor of this religious family.
Ale Najvyšší súd volil v prospech tejto
Adventism respond to the Hobby Lobby court case?
Firme Hobby
The
Lobby.
Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America released an official statement.
Adventisti dali oficiálny
This is
výrok.
written July 1st, 2014
2. júla
Adventism Today.
2014, Adventizmus dnes.
The Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America released an official statement yesterday saying that it was encouraged by the decision announced this week by the Supreme Court of the United States in the Hobby Lobby case. But there were Adventists who expressed reservations and concerns about the same decision.
Že podporujú to rozhodnutie Najvyššieho súdu, ale sú adventisti, ktorí sú voči tomu rezervovaní. To sú leviti.
Which safeguards the broad religious liberty protections available to all people of faith.
Že je to bezpečne na obranu slobody náboženstva.
One person commented and
Jeden
said,
človek na to
usually
komentoval,
religious rights are defined in terms of being protected from the government restricting one from doing something that you feel God wants you to do. It seems to have moved that the definition of religious rights has moved to a new thing altogether when it's about a right to exercise authority or to
vykonávať
dictate to
autoritu
employees
alebo
your
diktovať niečo
religious
svojim
belief.
zamestnancom, ako je naše
An
náboženské
example of the
presvedčenie.
hypocrisy of this ruling, it's in those justices on the Supreme Court are Catholic and Protestant. Largely Catholic.
Títo sudcovia na Najvyššom súde sú vo veľkej miere katolíci.
Provide birth control services in the healthcare to their workers, then the employee, it's the religious right of the employee to withhold that
rozhodli ako zamestnávateľia, že nebudú platiť svojim zamestnancom potraty.
But then what happens if you're a Jehovah's Witness? What happens if you're the employee and you're a Jehovah's Witness and you don't believe in blood transfusions? And now you own a company, you're a Jehovah's Witness, and you don't want to provide health care to your employees that would supply them with
nedáte zdravotnú
blood
starostlivosť svojmu zamestnancovi?
What the Supreme Court did is in that
To, čo
ruling they
urobil
put in a
vlastne
special
Najvyšší súd
clause
v
that
tomto
said
rozhodnutí,
this does not apply to blood transfusions.
je, že povedali, že netýka sa to...
There is no good reason except they're not Jehovah's Witnesses.
To rozhodnutie sa nebude aplikovať na transfúziu krvi.
So this isn't a decision of belief or of principle.
Toto nie je rozhodnutie princípu, je to rozhodnutie o
of an employer onto an employee in a secular environment.
Zamestnávateľa presadzovať svoje náboženské presvedčenie v sekulárnej činnosti.
I just want us to see the danger that Adventism is in. It's just a revision.
To nebezpečenstvo, v ktorom je adventizmus.
That somewhere down the track they're going to disagree with these Catholic conservative Supreme Court justices, including the one currently being elected.
Vrátane aj toho, ktorý bol teraz, ktorá bola teraz zvolená. Oni v rovnakom čase a zároveň súhlasia s tými rozhodnutiami. To je to modlárstvo, v ktorom sme. A ten odpadlý protestantizmus zvolil týchto sudcov. My sme sa chceli vrátiť do deň Milleritov a pochopiť, prečo zlyhali.
And we've had to make some applications and some compare and contrast to
Museli
do
sme
that.
spraviť určité aplikácie a porovnanie a kontrast.
So it isn't my purpose today
Nie je to môjim zámerom
go back to Millerite history. We're not going to do that in today's study. Perhaps not in next week's study
možno ani nie
either.
na budúci týždeň.
What I'd like to do is actually to address some frequently occurring questions that people have been asking,
ktoré sú dosť často,
especially in the last couple of months.
Zvlášť za posledných pár mesiacov.
These questions have been coming up so frequently.
Otázky
I thought
prichádzajú veľmi
best to
často.
address them in a study or a couple of studies, rather than just go back onto Millerite history. So we are
Takže sa chcem na ne pozrieť v niekoľkých štúdiách.
Study of Millerite
Takže máme
history.
ďalšiu odbočku od štúdia Milleritov.
So it's more of a Q&A.
Takže sú to viac ako
But
otázky
with
a
the questions
odpovede.
already provided. And because of that, I would also encourage people to write on the chat
aby napísali do chatu
your thoughts,
svoje myšlienky,
added perspectives of the questions,
perspektívu
or answers to the
otázok a
questions.
odpovede.
So I am encouraging chat participation. Many of the questions that
Mnohé z
people have been
otázok,
asking
ktoré sa ľudia pýtajú,
reasonable questions,
sú rozumné,
questions I've had myself. They're honest-hearted
a ja som ich
questions.
mala, sú to
There's
otázky
nothing wrong with
úprimné.
asking questions.
Na tom nie je nič zlé sa
or having
pýtať,
questions.
alebo mať otázky.
But not all the questions are.
Ale nie všetky sú v tejto kategórii. Je to tu
Some
zmiešané.
are asked in good faith.
Niektorí sa
some are
pýtajú vo viere a niektorí nie.
One that was not asked in good faith.
Je tu jedna,
Example.
ktorá nebola pýtaná sa vo viere
Someone
dobrej.
asked the question,
Niekto sa pýtal,
how is the coming of Cambridge Analytica to the United States the Sunday law of 2014?
ako to, že Cambridge Analytica prišla do Spojených štátov, je nedeľným zákonom.
Why that is not an honest-hearted question. But we'll begin with one that has been asked by many people, and I think it's a good, reasonable question to ask.
Začnem s jednou, ktorou sa pýta mnoho ľudí.
When we look at this pattern, this is an omega structure. It applies for the end of ancient Israel
Keď sa pozrieme
and for the end of
na
modern Israel.
štruktúru
Two calls
omega
for the
pre
church,
staroveký a
one call
novoveký
for the
Izrael,
world or the Gentiles.
dve
So we're
volania
going to
pre
use both
cirkev a jedno pre svet.
End of ancient and end of modern. When we're
Je to
writing on these
koniec
lines.
starovekého a moderného Izraela.
What do we call these three lines?
Ako
What's our
nazývame
word
tieto
for
tri
these three?
línie? Čo to je?
Looking for answers. What would you call this?
Ako by ste to nazvali?
Fractals.
Fraktály.
Good participation. So we call these lines fractals.
Sú to fraktály.
What is the definition of a fractal?
Aká je definícia fraktálu?
I'll give a visual representation.
Dám takú vizuálnu reprezentáciu
It's a
toho.
structure.
Je to štruktúra.
If I can try and simplify something that goes over my head easily.
Skúsim to tak zjednodušiť.
You have this pattern. It looks
Máme
like a
takýto
Y shape.
vzorec. Akože,
If you take away that
keď
view,
vezmeme toto, keď toto zakrieme,
this becomes a fractal.
toto je
this.
fraktál
Can
tohto.
everyone see that?
Vidíte to?
So you have a pattern,
Máte
and then you
vzorec
have a repeat of that
a
pattern.
potom máte opakovanie toho
And you can do it
vzorca.
both sides.
A dá sa to spraviť na obidvoch stranách.
So we started with one
Začali
pattern,
sme s tým jedným vzorcom,
then we created another,
potom sme utvorili
and then we
ďalší,
created another.
a potom
And they all
ďalší.
become repetitive patterns.
Stávajú
And you
sa
can continue to
opakujúcimi
do
sa
this.
vzorcami. A toto môžete robiť ďalej a ďalej.
And this becomes a fractal tree.
Toto je taký
So we
strom
started with
fraktálny.
one,
Začali sme
then
s
we
jedným,
created, run out of hands,
potom sme, už nemám viac rúk,
that.
toto sme
But
utvorili
now we can see that
a
there's just
teraz
this.
vidíme len toto.
This little structure
Táto malá
is a
štruktúra
fractal of
je
our large one. Can
fraktálom
we see
toho
that?
veľkého. Vidíme to, že?
And you could zoom in and zoom
A
in,
môžete ísť
and
ďalej,
you could
ďalej a
continue to
ďalej
create smaller and
a
smaller
tvoriť
fractals.
menšie a menšie
And you can do
fraktály.
that to all the branches.
Dá sa to robiť
So
so
it's this
všetkými vetvami.
pattern where the
Takže je to
smaller
vzorec,
has the
kde ten
characteristics of the
menší má
larger.
vlastnosti toho väčšieho.
Brother Brendan, amplification that repeats the same structure. Correct.
Je to pridávanie, ktoré opakuje tú istú štruktúru.
So is everyone okay with that?
S týmto súhlasíme.
You could call this one,
môžeme zobrať toto,
the one we began with, the line of the 144,000.
Línia 144
and then you could say,
a potom môžeme povedať,
priests, Levites, Nethinims.
Kňazi, leviti, netinejci.
Does that make sense?
Dáva zmysel?
A large template model, and then you have these three smaller models on top of that.
Máme väčší model a potom tie menšie modely. Takže otázka.
When we come to our reform
Keď
line,
prídeme k našej reformnej línii,
end of ancient Israel,
konce starovekého Izraela,
this top line,
táto
where is
vrchná
the
línia,
cross?
kde je kríž?
What history?
V ktorých dejinách?
That line of the 144,000.
Je to línia 144,000.
There is no cross. It's because I haven't drawn a way markup. History of the early rain, someone says.
Dejiny ranného dažďa.
Concord in the second dispensation.
Concord v tom druhom období.
See, I tricked you, Brother Blessing, because I didn't, Sister Charity. We didn't have these in. Apologies. Now where is the cross? Someone said early rain.
Kde je kríž?
So early rain is this history.
Je to v období ranného dážďa.
What's this waymark?
Čo je tento milník? Koniec starovekého Izraela.
34.
34
goes
rok.
to the Gentiles.
Evangelium ide k pohanom.
The work is done for the church.
Dielo je konané pre cirkev, pre židovský národ.
This is the second call
Toto je druhé
to
volanie
the church that
cirkvi,
begins here.
ktoré začína tu.
The second harvest of the Jewish nation. So this
Druhá
waymark
žatva
is
židovského
Pentecost.
národa.
And this
Takže toto sú
waymark
letnice
is the
a
cross.
toto je kríž.
Does that make sense?
Dáva zmysel?
So this is where the cross is on the line of
Takže
the
toto je miesto, kde je
144,000,
kríž
the
na
big
línii
template line for the end
144,000.
of ancient Israel. Where is the cross for the first group called?
Kde je kríž pre tú prvú skupinu?
Where does the cross go?
Kam ide ten kríž?
Fractalize it.
Urobíme z toho fraktál?
Someone says fourth waymark.
Niekto hovorí štvrtý milník, záver milosti.
What's the problem with what you just did?
Aký je tu problém?
What's the issue? Sister Adriana says that's not a fractal. I agree.
Adriana
Where
hovorí,
would
že to
you
nie je
place it if you're going to
fraktál?
fractalize that history?
Kam by sme to dali, ak by sme z toho robili fraktál?
People are still saying 2019.
Ľudia stále hovoria 2019.
Early rain.
Ranný dážď.
What's the year? We're taking this model and we're going to fractalize it.
Berieme tento model a robíme z neho fraktál.
The early rain that begins in 2001. What's this waymark? 2009. Can you see what we just did?
Vidíte, čo sme spravili? To je 2009.
We took the large model,
Zobrali
which would take you from 4 BC to 100 AD, and we created a fractal of it. If you create a fractal of this line, you take the cross from the Concord waymark of the early rain and bring it to the Concord waymark of the early rain.
A prinesiete to sem na milník Concordu raného dážďa.
So what I want to suggest
Takže čo by som chcela navrhnúť
is we need to be specific about what we mean when we say that these lines are
ohľadne toho,
fractals.
čo tým myslíme, keď hovoríme, že fraktály.
if you look at fractals,
keď si vyhľadáte slovo fraktály,
it goes into complex mathematics, which
je komplexná matematika.
It can be a challenge, but they list
čo môže byť
three
také
different
ťažké,
types of fractals.
ale hovoria tu o 3 typoch fraktáloch.
I won't really, I'll just say they list 3 different types. I will just particularly show that there's 2 varieties.
Sú tu dve,
The first type
ja
of
poviem tie
fractal
dve.
is called exact,
Prvé je
self-similar.
presná podobnosť.
That's what we have here.
To je toto tu.
That's generally the pictures that you would have seen
Toto
if
je
you would
obrazok,
Google
ktorý by ste
the
našli,
picture of a
keď pôjdete na
fractal.
Google
It'll show you
a
something like
budete hľadať
that.
fraktály,
And
nájdete
it's an
niečo
exact
podobné.
self-similar fractal. So this is exactly what this is, which is exactly
Že
what
toto je
this
presne,
is.
čo je toto
An
a to je
exact
presne, čo je toto.
self-similar fractal.
To je presne podobný vzorec, alebo rovnaký.
But there are very
Sám
few
sebe
exact
podobný
self-similar
vzorec.
fractals in nature.
V prírode je takýchto vzorcov veľmi málo.
Self-similar.
Ale to, čo je oveľa bežnejšie, je niečo, čo sa nazýva
So you have exact and you
kvázi,
have quasi. The third type is called statistical
kvázi
self-similar.
podobné a ten tretí typ je štatisticky podobné.
V
tomto nechcem teraz pozerať, aký je rozdiel medzi kvázi a štatisticky, ale chcem, aby sme videli, že sú fraktály, ktoré sú presné a potom tie, ktoré nie sú presné. Kvázi znamená čiastočne. Čiastočne fraktál. Je to taký hybrid. Máme presné fraktály,
tends to be shown in drawings, in pictures.
To vidno aj na obrazoch rôznych.
But you have what is much more common
to,
is a
čo je oveľa
which is a mixture.
Také bežnejšie je tento kvázi podobný fraktál.
Please? I'm sorry, it's hard to read on the board. It's a QUASI. That was private. A quasi self-similarity. So without needing to be technical, it really just means that you have fractals that are exact and you have fractals that are a hybrid but still considered a
fraktály,
fractal.
ktoré sú presné, ako keby kopie jedno druhého. A potom sú také, ktoré sú polokopie. Veľmi si ušetríme mnoho problémov, keď sa s týmto nejak tak vysporiadame alebo stotožníme. To, s čím sa my vysporiadame, sú čiastočné fraktály. Dôvod, prečo to máme, je, že ako používame tieto dejiny. Ak by sme robili fraktál z kríža, ak by sme robili fraktál z kríža,
we would take it from this line and we would see the cross here.
Zobrali by sme to
then we're going to place the cross here for the Levites and then we'll place the cross here for the Nethinims. Does that make sense? That would be to take this history and
Toto by
to
bolo zobrať tie
fractalize it.
dejiny a urobiť z nich fraktál.
If we were to see the end of ancient Israel as one long history,
keby sme mali vidieť koniec starovekého Izraela ako jedny dlhé dejiny,
to fit it into these models, we would take it and we would squish
že by sme
it
tie
together,
dejiny vlastne veľké zobrali do, akože by sme ich tak nejak zmenšili do menšieho,
fit over 2009, or you're going to stretch
alebo ich
it and you're
rozťahneme.
going to make it a smaller event fit on a larger model. You're going to manipulate that history.
A budeme manipulovať tie dejiny. Toto je rozdiel medzi našou metodológiou a metodológiou FFA. Im to nevadí veci zmenšovať alebo rozširovať a rôzne deliť dejiny, aby to pasovalo na epochu, ktorú chcú. Niekto sa pýtal, či musíme držať obidva koncepty v jednom a tom istom čase.
And I would suggest
2019 a 2009. Ja by som povedala, že nie.
When we make the cross 2009,
keď my z 2009 spravíme kríž, to by bola nesprávna metodológia. A museli by ste s tými dejinami manipulovať. My musíme sa vysporiadať s tým, že my používame celé tie dejiny od 4 BC po rok 100. A teraz sem vpúšťame, čo kam patrí.
Levites.
Vidíme tu učeníkov, levitov, pohanov.
John as 144,000.
Jána.
And we're not manipulating the history.
Nemanipulujeme dejinami. Nemôžeme utvoriť celú novú reformnú líniu. Ale to nie je nová reformná línia, to je manipulácia tejto reformnej línie. Máte k tomu nejaké otázky?
What FFA would repeatedly do that we were battling
against, to, čo FFA robila, je, proti čomu my sme bojovali, je, že manipulovali dejiny.
And you could do that if you believed
Dá sa to
in
spraviť,
that exact definition
ak veríte v túto presnú definíciu fraktálov. Potom kríž nebude 2019,
but 2009.
Ale 2009.
And then you would have to go back to
a budete sa musieť vrátiť do 2009.
I won't go any lower, Mrs. Bennett, I promise. I promised my sister. You would have to go back to 2009 and try and force the cross onto that way.
A snažiť sa to tam nejako napasovať.
And then you're going to have to try and see
a potom budete sa musieť snažiť
what happened in
vidieť,
2009.
čo sa stalo v 2009.
What great disappointment
aké veľké sklamanie
the movement faced.
Prežilo hnutie. Akou veľkou skúškou prešlo. Aké rozdelenie prišlo. Ako sme konfrontovaní s krízou ohľadne podstaty kráľovstva. Toto tu nenájdete. A začnete manipulovať ich reformnú líniu.
And reinventing our own history.
Budete musieť naše vlastné dejiny začať nejako inak vnímať.
The cross would be fulfilled
aby ste videli, že kríž sa v 2009 naplnil. To sa proste nestalo. Kríž je 2019. Čo tým myslím, keď hovorím, že je to manipulácia, prinášať kríž odtiaľto sem, musíte zobrať tie dejiny a zmanipulovať ich.
Or squish, condense it down. It's 4 BC to 100 AD.
Od 4 BC po 100 rokov.
It's understanding that this is just one part of that history in sequential order. So you have the disciples.
V poradí, jedno za druhým.
First group for the Jews.
Takže sú tu učeníci.
Then you're going to
to je prvá skupina Židov.
Second group for the Jews.
Potom vidíme druhú skupinu Židov.
Then you're going to see Gentiles.
Pohanov.
Called in. And then you're going to see the 144,000 typified by John the Revelator.
V predobraze Jana Krstiteľa, Jana Zjavovateľa.
We're not cutting it up.
My tie dejiny nemanipulujeme, neukrajujeme z nich.
What is fractalized is the structure.
To, čo fraktalizujeme, je štruktúra.
Do we see any disappointment in 2019?
Je tu nejaké sklamanie v 2019?
I would suggest that we do.
Áno.
But there are two types of disappointments.
Ale sú dva druhy
sklamaní. The disappointment of the disciples and Christ
sklamanie Krista a učeníka nebolo to isté, ako čo mali Milleriti a Samuel Snow.
So the disappointment of
Takže to sklamanie Krista a učeníkov. Kristus bol sklamaný. Pretože oni nezostali s ním sa modliť. Ale nebolo to pre ňoho prekvapenie. Bolo to bolestivé, ale nie prekvapujúce. V jeho posolstve nebola chyba, ale sklamanie u Samuela Snowa a Millerita bolo iné. Tam bola chyba v posolstve.
We're disappointed by the shaking and the split,
sme
though it really shouldn't have been a surprise. We're disappointed by the fact that we didn't understand November 9.
Ale nebolo to
Also shouldn't be
prekvapenie.
a surprise because we have
Nemalo
reform
by to
lines
byť
that tell
kvôli
us we
tomu,
wouldn't at the time. So it is
že reformné línie
disappointing.
nám to hovorili.
But
Boli sme
none of
sklamaní,
that indicates a mistake
ale
in
to
the
neznamená,
message
že je v
because there
posolstve
wasn't
chyba.
in the end of ancient Israel. So to
Nebola to
answer
ani v starovekom
a question,
Izraeli. Aby som na to odpovedala,
yes, the
áno,
cross falls on 2019.
kríž padá na
It cannot be
2019,
put on 2009,
nemôžeme ho dať na
which is
2009.
there, or 2016 or 2020.
Tu je 2016 alebo 20, je to 19.